Hello. You can likely relate to the dilemma that I'm having right now. If you've ever recorded a voice greeting on your phone, it's the same thing. It's like I have not thought at all about what I'm gonna say, but I know what I want to say, but I haven't thought of it. Or I usually like to think out my wording and everything beforehand, so I don't. Because you'll notice that I start kind of stuttering a lot and I can't think of the right words. But I want it to be authentic, so I'm not thinking on it beforehand. But what I wanted to say about was my children and how they fit something that I was just studying about. And I wanted to make a video about it because I was like, well, this isn't a experiment. There's no bias, there's no behavior bias, or it's not like we're observer bias is what I was talking about, I guess. It's not where people are like wanting you to believe. Because I took a class in statistics where I learned about all the different tricks that people do to make things look a certain way. They do a study, and so it's backed by a study, and then they manipulate and everything. But I want it to be so that you can trust and because it's not polished. That's one of the ways that you can know this is totally off the cuff. My children, I was studying one of the things that children don't meet milestones as quickly because they're developing in different ways. There's sensitive periods where they develop certain things, and basically parents have not been aware of those certain points, and that's why my children seem to be so entirely different than others. They seem to be not meeting some social milestones because I'm like, well, they're going to learn to do this. I learned that quickly with one of my oldest daughters. She didn't walk until she was like 18 months or something. I was like, it's not like she's going to grow up and not learn to walk just because she's not walking. Everyone's like, maybe you should massage her, maybe she's malnourished, all this different stuff, because she's really like a string bean. She was really tall and skinny and everything. And they're like, well, maybe there's something wrong with her developmentally. She should be walking by now. And I'm like, well, that's fine. I don't mind carrying her around. And there's a lot of things that I don't do. I do for my kids. But in this past chapter that I was studying on cognitive development, the children are very sensitive and they're like geniuses mentally. They're thinking all these things, and so if you're distracting them and forcing them to learn these social behaviors and these other cues, then they're missing this great opportunity that they have to learn things that they can learn later in life, but it won't be as easy for them. The example that was on a TED Talk that I had seen was they were talking about learning languages. There's a window when the word they used wasn't sensitive. Anyway, it's critical. There's a critical time for if people speak to a child in that language, it'll be easier for them to understand that language later. But if they don't and they're just brought up in a home with one language and they try to say, well, their ability to learn it is at an exponential curve going down. And pretty much once you get to be 18 years old, you might as well forget it. Well, that isn't true because missionaries in our church go and they learn foreign languages and they speak their foreign languages just fine. And there's all those people that try to make money off of people trying to learn a language so that they can so that they can open up to the international market. What does this have to do with child development? Well, I'm just saying that sure, they could learn things later in life, and there could be other children who will be as intelligent and be able to understand these deeper scientific concepts. But my children have a certain, and yesterday somebody was talking to me and they said, "Oh, it's great that you know what your kids are interested in, so you can kind of steer them towards that." And my steering has come from them. It's an interactive kind of thing. It's like they express an interest and they have a talent. Oh, because the reason we had a conversation was my daughter loves art. She thinks she's so artistic, and she is really good, and her art is amazing. And she showed me this art that she did, and I was really impressed when she told me what it was. But then at the school they have an art club, and they posted a picture of everybody's art that they had done, and I looked at some other pictures of the kids had held up, and the one was of kids in her class. Some of those kids were in her class, and their art was a whole lot better than my daughter's. And I was like, well, do I need to tell her that? She looks to me to compliment her. Of course, your mother. And I've explained that to her when she asks me all the time, well, what do you think? Do you think this is good? And I always tell her, I say, well, you're asking the wrong person, because I am very biased. I will tell you it's great. And so don't base whether you're good or not because I think it's good, because it doesn't matter. I always think things are good. I'm not going to look at it and say, oh, that's terrible. But her painting, I told her, I said, well, yours looks like a Picasso in comparison. Of course, to her, she's like, oh, famous artist. Yeah, hers is famous compared to the other kids who's just minimal, that it might be good at, but it's not incredible art or anything. I don't know. I'm like, well, do I discourage her from that? Because I think maybe she doesn't have a talent. But if she really enjoys it, I think she will excel. But anyway, my whole point was there is a window where they're very interested in a particular thing, and I encourage them to seek after the things. And people ask me sometimes why I teach these things. I'm talking way over the kids' heads. I'm like, no, I just don't talk down to the kids, because just because they're not able to communicate with me does not mean they don't understand it. So I speak to the kids about things that I'm learning right now, and I read books way above their reading level to them, and I let them watch documentaries and things that I don't quite understand. But now my children, they're learning it. Their intelligence as far as scientific and all these different areas are way above what others. Now they don't have milestones. They have, well, they kind of do. They have dibbles and certain standardized tests that they take. And my children are, and my older children are the same. They've always scored way off. Well, if they're meeting those milestones, but not meeting the other ones because I'm taking care of them and doing them. So they don't have, it's kind of like a division of labor kind of thing. They're able to focus on learning now when their mom is there and can take care of them. It's not like they're not going to learn how to do things. We're just working on developing other social abilities and social traits and talents later in life. One of the main things that was obvious to me was when we went at church, there's a primary for the younger children. And when we went in, all the other kids are sitting reverently with their arms folded and quietly, and my kids, they can't do that. And I had to sit with my son for a long time, and he would not stay in there. He'd get up and leave. He's only admittedly about 3 to 5 years old at this time. Even now, he climbs under the desk and hides when the teacher. And I used to be his teacher, and so I told him that was not okay. So he'd come up and want to sit beside me the whole time. And he'd put a chair, when I'd ask him to come help me set the chairs up, he'd put a chair right by me. Oh, this is for the teacher's helper. And then he'd always ask, can I be the teacher's helper? I was like, I don't have a teacher's helper. But anyway, my whole point is that he has been very dependent on me. Things like tying his shoes. I recently, I think it was last week sometime, I was telling some people that I'm really proud of him learning to tie his shoes because I've done that for him the whole time. It's not like I ever thought he wasn't going to tie his shoe. I knew the day was going to come. That just wasn't something that I thought. Right now, it's not as necessary for him to learn. I've done a whole lot of rambling. I hope that I addressed the whole issue of... Oh, well, it's because in one of those quizzes I took for my class, they said children of one area meet milestones of walking and holding their head up and stuff, like, way, like, noticeably. Not just, like, a few couple people outperform others. Like, my children, it's like my daughter, my very first daughter, when as soon as she was born, she was lifting her head up and looking around in the nursery, and we were like, which one is ours? When you go look in the window, they're like, the one that's looking around, that's yours. Because, and I used to try to hold her head because I was told to be careful of their neck, and she was like always pushing up against it. She had a really strong neck, but apparently people in some other country had these other abilities that are benchmarks for Western society. Well, they meet them at a different time period. I'm like, so that isn't standard. That's not for all babies. That's for American babies. Made me really start to think, and I didn't have the textbook, so I was trying to find out information, and they'd listed, it was a multiple choice question, where do these children meet their milestones, like, significantly at a faster pace. And there was this one study group, and I was like, well, it could be them because it was where they were considered rude to their children because they aren't loving like we are. That's because that's not their culture. It's not their society. And there's a lot of other things. And I thought, well, maybe that's why they're meeting the milestones quicker, because they're needed to perform things. Because I was noticing that with my children. They don't need to do things, so they don't. And that's what I was noticing in primary when I go and I see these other kids doing all these things. And like when at school, I walk my kids to school. Other kids, they walk to school by themselves. Well, to me, that seems like bad parenting. And it makes me nervous. And I would think something like that's rude. That's like a Western American person seeing a person in that other culture and saying, you're being a bad parent. You're doing something that's rude just because they don't do the same thing as we do. I'm not saying it's better. I'm just saying maybe we need to reconsider that. Maybe, because I've noticed that I know there's another family too that has really smart children. And every single one of her children, they're like substantially higher, smarter than others. And I was like, I was trying to figure out, what is it that you're doing? And if anything, she's like, well, if anything, it's the same thing. She's probably doing too much for them. Or I think maybe it's expecting children to understand and tell them more things than what is, in the lingo of the other educators, age appropriate. By age appropriate, talking about extreme wormholes to little 2-year-olds. People would be like, oh, don't do that. Like, because I was talking about kinetic and potential energy. And my husband says, oh, they're not going to understand that. I'm like, well, yes, they won't if you don't ever talk about it to them. Just like when I was little, I remember hearing people say, don't talk to people in little kids' voices because it does them a disservice. Why is it that we expect children to grow up to be a certain way? Well, the way we work, the way our culture expects people to fit in the culture. Well, why don't we just say children are perfect? Let's let them show us how we should be living. Anyway, I said my piece.